critical look at animal rights activists and their supporters. He calls his film Flying Fur.
Down in the woods today, you're sure of a big surprise. If you go down in the woods today, you better go in disguise. For every bear that ever there was will gather there for certain, because today's the day the teddy bears have their picnic.
It's a non-violent piece of direct action. The devices you're talking about, they're built into a little cigarette pack. They're designed to go off at night to produce some smoke, to set the sprinkler systems off. They're not designed to burn down stores at all. The only stores that have been burned down, Debenhams in Luton, Dickens and Jones in Milton Keynes, Dingles in Plymouth, they had faulty sprinkler systems. You can imagine if they had a fire in the middle of the day, they didn't have sprinkler systems.
Stores burnt to the ground, but you say that's non-violent.
I wanted to make this film because farriers have been threatened by guys with shooters. Ball bearings have gone through windows, superglue has been put into locks, and there have been bomb outrages and death threats. I'm a fur trader, and I'm a spokesman for the Fur Education Council. So I have my own livelihood to protect, and also the livelihoods of all my colleagues in the trade. I'm certainly not totally objective. I don't think such an animal that exists is a totally objective animal. I do try not to reduce the arguments to emotional screaming matches, which is what I think that the animal liberationists of every stripe do.
We've had like women's liberation movement at the time, black liberation came to the forefront, animal liberation. Our time has come now.
Rights are about a group of people struggling to achieve equality or fairness in their treatment. And the way that animal rights is used is a totally different sense, because it's not the animals who are struggling in that sense. It is humans who, by virtue of our being human, actually are arguing about how we confer rights on animals. So in a sense, the debate about animal rights isn't a debate at all about animal rights. It's a debate about what duties we have because we are human in the way that we relate to other living species in the planet.
Our way of life has always been to live with the environment, with nature. It was a harsh way to live, but we followed the animals, and we were part of the whole environment, part of nature. Then when the Europeans came over, they exploited the fact that we were able to get the animals and the fur, because we used to barter with other tribes, whether it was fur for fish or buffalo, or we always had the ability to barter amongst our own tribes. And someone had the big idea of exploiting Indian people for their ability of getting furs. And 500 years later, they're coming back and saying, hey, the way you've been living for the last thousands of years is cruel, that you shouldn't be killing these little animals for food or for jackets or for wear. It's racism. They always know better. We can't stand the fact that it's 1990s, that anyone should come to our country and tell us how we should live anymore.
The question of our living in nature with animals, both wild and domestic, is extremely complicated. And to get it across briefly and successfully, you have to oversimplify it, and the best way to oversimplify it is to pitch it on an emotional level. School children are a very soft target because they come straight from their cuddly animal to the very spurious posters, and the latest one is the fox cub. The fox cub's mother may well be dead, but if she is, she's probably run over by a car or just died of disease or something. Nobody trapped her for her fur coat, because these cubs are born in the spring or the summer when the mother's coat is not worth trapping. And so it's that sort of rather creepy half-truth, although in this case I would say not half-true at all, mostly untrue. That is their general style of propaganda. I don't think there's much difference between the nature of the anti-fur propaganda aimed at children and aimed at adults. Both rely on emotion rather than fact, on making people feel guilty about wearing fur coats and about their relationship with animals. Take, for example, the well-known Lynx anti-fur campaign poster. All the animals used in it were farmed animals. When they are killed, no blood is shed whatsoever, and yet the blood is splashed around as if there's no tomorrow. In fact, there's very little blood spilled in the trapping of wild animals either. The real issue, which is how we live in nature and how we maintain the balance between ourselves and wild animals, is never addressed by Lynx. In November 1989, Lynx asked people to bring their fur coats to Trafalgar Square for a ceremonial dumping, after which the garments were to be taken away and destroyed. This was supposed to show contempt for the fur industry, for fur coats, and for the people who continued to own them. The fur trade protested that this was a terrible waste of clothes that could have kept people warm in a cold winter. Lynx took no notice of this. I think they were too busy scoring points to think about human welfare. It seems incredible to me that while this ceremony was going on, a mere few hundred yards away, people were actually freezing in cardboard boxes. The middle classes on this occasion supported Lynx's action rather than give their fur coats to a good cause.
Seven
Sorry to
skins.
say, yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Doesn't bear thinking about how they were
No,
obtained.
I've had it for about 40 years
Really?
before one knew about these things.
I was invited to go to Exeter University to oppose the motion that this house disapproves of the killing of animals for their skins, which I did to the best of my ability. My opponent was Mark Glover, the leader and spokesman for Lynx. Something happened there that was quite insightful to me. When I met him, naturally, I said hello and extended my hand. Well, he turned away and refused to shake my hand, and afterwards, of course, he wouldn't have dinner with me or talk to me in any way. And I thought, my goodness, he must be emotionally very deeply involved in this. And then I thought, well, if I'd been invited to debate something with, say, Adolf Hitler or Joe Stalin or something, I wouldn't shake his hand or be willing to break bread with him. And I suppose that's how he sees me and the fur trade.
Thank you very much. In his recent book, The Animal Contract, distinguished zoologist Dr. Desmond Morris argued that a new form of relationship with animals was required if we as a species are to survive on this planet. This new contract took the form of a Bill of Rights, embodying 10 commandments. Number 9 of that list was that no animal should be exploited for its fur, its skin, its ivory, or any other luxury product. And it's with good reason that he emphasized this particular area of animal abuse, since in the case of fur, I believe that the fur industry has been one of, if not the most destructive and cruel abusers of the planet's wildlife ever, in fact.
I heard that Desmond Morris on the wireless say that he thought it was okay for hunter-gatherers to trap and kill animals for survival, but not for the fur trade, because that was a luxury. Thanks a bunch. Whose luxury? When the Inuit traps in order to sell, it's not for his luxury. He's just trying to raise his living standard a gnat's above the subsistence level that Dr. Morris so graciously grants him. Dr. Morris, immediately after, also saying words to the effect that farm-fur animals live lives of constant pain, admitted on the same program that he had never been to a fur farm.
I'm sick of the hypocrisy of the fur trade in bringing up these poor, abused people in the north of Canada as a means of excusing their disgusting commercial industry. The history of the relationship between the Inuit and other tribes of North American Indians and the fur trade is disgusting. The fur trade went in, disrupted their social relationships, destroyed their communities, traded skins for rum, gave them diseases, completely ruins their lives, got them hooked on a cash economy. Then they have the gall to turn around and say that these people, their lives are in tatters and ruined because we want to stop people in Knightsbridge and Sloane Street wearing fur coats.
I mean, he's 500 years a little too late to be concerned about these pitiful little tribes of Indians and Inuits in Canada. But I think what you have, he doesn't realize, in fact, is that he's affecting us twice. We're being exploited twice. We were exploited maybe 500 years ago for the cash economy. Now we're being exploited because of people who are not understanding the wildlife system, the ecosystem, the conservationist approach that we deal with in Canada, particularly amongst the native people. He's exploiting that whole process of little furry animals dying in pain, and it's cruel.
Well, every time that a fur-bearing animal has value, it's normally managed. They've got quotas or seasons. They are looked after, so to say. And they are looked after in a way so that you can have these animals next year and next year again to continue to trap them in a sustainable way. They are taken care of, so to say. But if you are degrading them to pest animals, many of these fur-bearing animals will be pest animals if they are not trapped for fur. When the hunting ban was introduced in Kenya several years ago, there had been a decline in the population of rhino and elephants. But when the hunting ban was introduced, there came a very, very sharp decline in these animals because we took the value away from the animals, and then they were worthless for the local farmers, so just throw them away.
If Mr. Glover was very concerned of wildlife and also very concerned of those pitiful little Indians that he's concerned about in Canada, then he should come to Canada and start lobbying for the fact that Indian people, particularly the Inuit people and the Aboriginal people in Canada, to take control of wildlife. Then we will have two things. We'll have pitiful little Indians being comfortable where they're living at in their own country, and you still have wild fur-bearing animals roaming around in the north.
The bishops across the north and church leaders and church communities across the north are very concerned with the arguments that are being used against trappers and the effect that this is going to have on the lifestyle of northern people. The difficulty with challenging the trapping lifestyle is that people get separated from the land, and we know from history that this has had devastating consequences on northern communities. People need to be in touch with the land, they need to be harvesting the land and living off the land, and people in the north are often suffering terrible social dislocation to start with, and this could have a really devastating effect. Is it moral to keep animals in captivity, and people want leather and they want to feed their dogs and cats meat and they want steak on the table. They want to wear fibers that are produced with some of the most horrific chemicals. And yet here are people who are allowing animals to have their life in the wild and to run free, and for a very brief moment when they're harvested to take them. And there are some important questions of morality, and it's very important that we just don't impose a sort of a citified view of morality on people who are living in outlying areas.
We've always had the attitude that we're not owners of the land, that we are actually caretakers of the land. So that we've been, in fact, a very strong opponent of major resource developments, and we've been viewed as a very major concern, both in legal terms and environmental ways. So what now has happened is the animal rights movement has given sort of a license to major resource developers to be able to say that Indian people are also murderers and killers of these fur-bearing animals, without really understanding the whole process of wildlife.
Some people would say that the animal rights movement started in Britain in the same way as various other moral crusades have started in Britain. In some ways, I wonder if that isn't tied up with the fact that Britain was, after all, the first of all the societies to industrialize. So during particularly the 19th century, there was this tremendous transfer of what had been a rural population, a population which was 80–90% rural, into a population which by the end of the 19th century was 80 or 90% urban, one of the most highly urbanized populations in the world, where people were cut off very dramatically and quickly from the natural world, from the world of animals, and therefore developed a sort of romanticism about the animal world, the natural world, which was a way of compensating for this sudden transition into an urban environment. But it seems to me that a lot of that romanticism is very much an urban romanticism.
I think today it starts in the nursery. We take in, quite literally, our attitude to animals with our mother's milk. So many bedtime stories feature animals, and many of the toys we get when we are very young and become most attached to are animals with human characteristics. As a result, I think that children may have difficulty in seeing any animals as wild animals. And that is probably the reason for the success in schools of the anti-sealing campaign. I have noticed that the most attractive of these toy animals are the ones with the most human features, and therefore the furthest removed from the wild animals themselves. It seems to me that that distance from the reality of wild animals is important and significant. People who live with wild animals don't have sentimental and romantic ideas about them. You have to be far from the smell, the sound, and the danger of wild animals to find them lovable, and in fact to want to take them to bed with you. Of course, much humanizing of animals is clearly benign, but there are other aspects of it that can be quite sinister.
Police in the West Country have issued an artist's impression of a man wanted for questioning in connection with 3 bomb attacks believed to be the work of animal rights extremists.
The police say it's only good fortune that no one has been killed by the animal rights extremists. They're so concerned the bombers will try again that they took the unusual step today of putting all their evidence on display in the hope the public will be able to help.
The fear in our hearts is that after 3 bombs, all linked with animal experimentation, the last 2 of which were certainly intended to kill, we've got a very real fear that unless we catch the bombers, somebody is going to die with bombs in the future.
In the second of the 2 attacks on cars in June, a piece of shrapnel badly injured a 13-month-old child sitting in a pushchair.
Just to convince the world that this bomb was meant to kill, and this little child very nearly died.
In a war, you have to take up arms, and people will get killed, and I would totally defend their tactics. I will say to you, though, and I can look you straight in the eye and say I'm nothing to do with the animal rights militia. The fact, though, that I support them, I think is neither here nor there. I do support them. Obviously, for many reasons, I couldn't get involved in that sort of action myself. But I can support that type of action by petrol bombing and by bombs under cars and probably shootings at a later stage of vivisectors on their doorstep. I can see that happening. It's a war, and there's no other way that you can stop vivisectors.
Animal rights people seem to me to have an exaggerated sense, partly, of a distorted morality. Partly they come out of a view in which is prevalent in some areas also within the environmentalist movement, in which they see the world as a world in which everything around is beautiful and only humans are vile. It's a sort of reverse Christianity in some ways in terms of the ethic with which it approaches the world. I find that very problematic. There is this belief somehow within the animal rights movement that if only humanity wasn't there, then cats would stop hunting mice, mosquitoes would stop biting, sort of the animal world would be one in which the lion would lay down with the lamb, and that the contradictions in the struggle for survival between different species and amongst different species, those contradictions would be gone. Biology isn't like that. The world is constantly in movement. It's not static in the way that this animal rights view has. We have to understand the world as evolving dialectically and constantly changing as a result of these struggles between and amongst species. Even if humanity wasn't there, there would still be, quote, injustice done by one animal species to another and one animal to another.
It's a peaceful demonstration! You won't be helping the animals! You're not helping yourselves! Come on!
I think that the animal rights movement is divided, by and large, into two groups. There is a very large, an overwhelmingly large, proportion of animal lovers who have developed out of the animal welfare movement that has been going on in this country for at least 200 years. The other half of the animal rights movement, those who think in terms of confrontation, have been corrupted by the media, by the desire to catch the attention of the camera and the microphone. And when they do that, they understand that they have to pitch their argument on a non-intellectual and non-rational level. I would include in that group the Animal Liberation Front. Where these two groups are side by side, that is to say, when animal activists who are strongly politically motivated are supported by animal welfare groups, the panic, the emotion, the loathing are contagious and spread between the two. So I think that animal welfare organizations are being towed along in the wake of animal rights groups.
The militants don't stop at demonstrations. This one is against fox farming. While the RSPCA preaches morality, the ALF practices violence. And while this is condemned by the Royal Society, their fur campaign has the unwanted support of the militants. Within hours of our filming trip to the anonymous mink farm, the owner received an abusive and threatening phone call.
So you make little minks into fur coats, do you? Well, I just think you're f***ing murdering shit. Yeah, and you're going to get your place vandalised soon. ALF rules.
What I fear about the animal rights movement is it doesn't recognize contradiction. It wants a non-contradictory utopian society in which one can iron out all of these problems. One can't. The real world is very grainy and very difficult. It presents us constantly with complex moral choices. Choices about saving humans as opposed to saving animals, choices about who is going to live and who is going to die. Those choices are masked by economic and social pressures, but they're there nonetheless, and you can't wish them away. Wrapped up within the animal rights movement is, I think, a feeling or a hope that you can wish away such complexities, and you can't.
The sort of profile of the anti-fur movement is white, middle-class, urban. And they do see trappers as an integral part of the fur industry, and trappers are, to them, rednecks, and quite alien. I think fur retailers, particularly in Britain, are seen as alien in a different way, because they are mainly Jewish. Lynx once used the archetypal image of the hook-nosed, fawning Jewish businessman with blood on his hands in one of their posters. For me, this immediately conjured up centuries of anti-Semitic propaganda.
There is, I think, a strand of real hatred of humans, And you actually see that in the very strange links that exist between some extreme right organizations, I would say even Nazi and fascist organizations, and movements within it, and tendencies within the animal rights movement. We should never forget that the one nation in the world which ever banned animal experimentation was, of course, Nazi Germany in the 1930s, which had laws against vivisection, unless, of course, the vivisection was being operated on those humans whom they regarded as Untermenschen, less even than non-human animals, Jews, gypsies, or other people outside the law. This is an extraordinary feature, this sort of Nazi and fascist tendency to find within its philosophy a love of some sort of pre-industrial society nature, which makes a natural affinity with certain strands within the animal rights movement. And you can see it in the way that there has, I think, been a deliberate attempt on the part of extreme right groups in Britain and elsewhere to permeate the animal rights movement, to work within it, partly as part of a way of raising campaigns against, for example, Muslim or Jewish practices in killing food. And this is a legitimation that you are opposed to kosher or halal killing because it's against animal rights. But partly also because of a genuine philosophical affinity between these extreme right ideas and some of those that within the animal rights movement.
This harping on the alienness of the fur trade goes back to the 20s and 30s, when there was a strong link between the British Union of Fascists and the animal rights movement. The British Union of Fascists campaigned against ritual slaughter because in those days, in Britain, it was seen as used only by Jews. I'm told by experts that in virtually every issue of recent extreme right-wing publications, there is reference to the need for more animal rights activism.
I find the way in which the movement wants to sort of make parallels with the Holocaust and with the concentration camps really sort of quite disgraceful as an argument. I do think some of the advertising they've used has been appalling in that sort of way. But one anecdote, I think, puts that into perspective. There is a German-based drug firm outside which the animal rights movement has routine protests once a year. And a local member of the animal rights movement, who is also a local member of a uniformed Nazi group, refused to carry a banner saying the name of this drug company, Animal Belsen, on the grounds that this was derogatory to the Germans because the concentration camps didn't exist, did they?
Please raise your hands now.
At the end of the debate at Exeter, the vote was taken and I lost. But I wasn't trying to gain instant converts. I was trying to plant a few ideas in the hope that on some future occasion, whether days or weeks or even months, they might resonate, they might echo, and someone might think in connection with something that they're discussing at the time, ah yes, I did hear a different point of view and maybe there's something in it.
The only message I have is that Europeans came over to Canada 500 years ago. We loaned them our country. They totally screwed up the environment. They totally screwed up the habitat of wildlife. But you know, that's what happened. What we're prepared to do, and what we're going to do, is we're going to save the world as indigenous people throughout the world of how man should live with the environment and how man should live with nature. Because obviously, non-Indian people have lost that whole contact. And I'm challenging those anti-fur movement people to take a month off, go live with the Inuit people, go live with the Indian people in northern Canada, and see how they live and how we live with nature. Then they can come back and tell the rest of Europe how it exactly really is.
If you go down in the woods today, you'd better not go alone. It's lovely down in the woods today, but safer to stay at home. For every bear that ever there was will gather there for certain, because today's the day the teddy bears have their picnic.